We must say, social media has greatly changed our lives. On the one hand, it brings us closer together and helps us stay connected. But on the other hand, it can lead to terrifying consequences. While some may dismiss these concerns as paranoia, there are those who know the dark side of social networks firsthand. And today we will witness a story that reveals their true danger. I will tell you about the infamous case of Takahiro Shiraishi, a Japanese man who used Twitter to commit monstrous crimes, leaving 9 innocent victims behind. This story will remind you that social media is not always what it seems, and we must always remain vigilant when using it. Autumn 2017, Zame City in Japan. A 23-year-old woman named Iko Tamura disappears without a trace. For 2 long days, her family received no news, no call, no message, no note. This was an especially difficult time for her loved ones, as Iko had recently lost her mother and was understandably in a state of deep depression. What made things worse was that she had been posting rather strange messages on her Twitter page. In her last post, she spoke about a strong desire to find a kindred spirit with whom she could share her final moments in life. Understandably, her relatives were shocked by this. Iko's brother, overwhelmed with worry, searched for any information that could lead to her whereabouts. Eventually, he managed to access her Twitter account and came across a very mysterious conversation. A stranger had contacted Iko with a profile picture of an anime character bearing a rope mark on its neck. The profile bio read, "I long to help those who are in a difficult situation. Don't hesitate to reach out to me." It seemed someone had indeed responded to the girl's desperate plea in her darkest hour. But the most horrifying detail, discovered by her brother, the account was named Hanging Pro, or in translation Professional Hanger. Combined with the avatar showing a rope mark on the neck and Iko's disappearance, the family became even more alarmed. Clearly, in such a situation, every minute counts. Her brother immediately started looking for more clues. Soon it became apparent that this person was almost impossible to track just by their online activity. But her brother didn't give up. He filed a missing persons report with the police, who then discovered yet another Twitter account belonging to the same user. In the meantime, her brother realized that there were at least several such accounts and began his own investigation. He found that many girls had already communicated with the criminals' accounts. He began messaging each of them in a desperate search for any further clues. Fortunately, one of them eventually responded and agreed to help. Together, they devised a fake date, intending to catch the hanger. The police also agreed to accompany the girl. The meeting was scheduled at the nearest station. Upon arrival, the hanger was already sitting there waiting. They followed him to a modest apartment in Zama, which by the way was about 40 minutes away from Iko's home. They entered, and at that moment, there was a knock at the door. The police entered. They were met by a man named Takahiro Shiraishi. He was a young man, and at 27, looked quite unremarkable. But what the search team was about to discover would send shivers down their spine. And clearly, our subject today needed professional help. When Takahiro was asked about the whereabouts of the missing girl, his answer was simply shocking. He pointed to the interior of his apartment and said, "She's there." But there was no one else inside. However, there were many refrigerators. Some of them were further inside the apartment. I think you can guess where this is going. Upon closer inspection, it became clear that these containers held fragments of Iko's body, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. As the investigation continued, authorities discovered a frightening number of other body parts. The amount of remains found was far more than what could have belonged to one girl, indicating the presence of multiple victims. In total, 9 heads and more than 240 bones were discovered. This led to the inevitable conclusion that the authorities were dealing with a serial killer. After Takahiro was taken into custody, he became the focus of intense attention. The horrifying truth of these murders gradually came to light, along with this man's disturbing profile. As it turned out, like many other criminals, he was known to his neighbors as a cheerful, kind, and polite person, and those same neighbors were shocked when they learned of the crimes he had committed. Someone who knew him as a child even described him as a quiet boy who knew how to interact politely with others. Now this just sounds ridiculous. For some reason, every criminal and maniac in stories like this seems to neighbors and others extremely friendly and kind, as if they all followed the same path in honing their social skills. But once, even as a child, Shiraishi demonstrated strange behavior that could have served as a warning of what everything would lead to. One of his childhood friends recalled that, as children, they used to play a game in which they would try to choke each other for fun. Before his crimes, he had been involved in shady activities in Tokyo's red light district, where he recruited women into prostitution using illegal methods. He used Twitter for his recruitment efforts, but was eventually arrested for it in February 2017 and received a suspended sentence. At that time, the 27-year-old, who was now unemployed, confessed his depression to his father and moved in with him. That's how Takahiro ended up in a critical situation and unfortunately chose the darkest path. Even then, he understood well that he had the ability to gain people's trust online, and he allowed himself to become drawn into Twitter again. But now, for far more sinister reason. 2 months later, in August 2017, he felt that things were looking up. He told his father some good news. He had met a woman and wanted to move out immediately, for which he needed his father's help, given he was unemployed. His father agreed and signed the lease for that very fateful apartment. The details of Takahiro's crimes were simply horrifying. He lured his victims, mostly those suffering from depression and anxiety disorders, into this apartment, promising to help them die. He called himself an executioner. However, once they were inside, he strangled them and then packed their body parts into containers. Hence, the Twitter handle that became his nickname, Hanging Pro or Professional Hanger. At the trial, Shiraishi said that it was easier to persuade and manipulate people suffering from anxiety and other mental issues. His motives were rooted in his own feelings of worthlessness and loneliness. He wanted to feel powerful and in control. He found that in the act of taking lives. He also claimed to enjoy the process of dismemberment, which he compared to meat processing. Takahiro was caught only thanks to the discovery of his account in the messages with Aiko Tamura and her brother's quick action. In the end, he was found guilty of all 9 crimes and sentenced to death. His tweets were aimed at people struggling with emotional problems, looking for someone to talk to. He created the image of a compassionate, understanding, and non-judgmental person, which allowed him to appear trustworthy and approachable. Unfortunately, this persona was just a facade that Takahiro used to lure vulnerable women into his apartment, where he committed horrific acts. His use of social media to find victims made it more difficult for police to track him, as he could hide behind numerous anonymous accounts. When news of Shiraishi's monstrous crimes spread, it shocked Japanese society and clearly demonstrated the dark side of social media, where vulnerable people looking for support can fall victim to twisted individuals. The case became a media sensation. Newspapers spread rumors about possible cannibalism and his having a large collection of photographs of his victims. Most media outlets tried to conceal the identities of the victims, but eventually their names became known. Shiraishi's trial was a grim event, attended by the families of his victims. They heard terrible details about the final moments of their loved ones. For example, 21-year-old Mizuki Miura became his first victim. He met her online. He desperately needed money to move into that apartment and convinced the girl to lend him the funds. Then, he invited her again, under the pretense of returning the money. After that, Mizuki was never seen again. He strangled her with a rope, and of course kept the money. Around the same time, he met another girl, Kurei Shihara. Just days after Mizuki's case, he convinced Kureha to come to him and again strangled her with a rope. Just a few days later, he dealt with 20-year-old Shoguni Shinaka. The young man told his mother he was going to a concert, but instead went to meet Takahiro. This time, the hanger deliberately chose a male victim, believing that if he only pursued girls, it would expose him. The result, of course, was the same strangulation with a rope. And we've covered only 3 cases. There were 9 victims in total. The courtroom was filled with a palpable sense of grief, anger, and disbelief as Takahiro recounted his crimes without a shred of compassion. Despite his lawyer's efforts to portray him as a troubled individual in need of help, Shiraishi himself seemed resigned to his fate. He confessed and expressed readiness to face the consequences, even if it meant the death penalty. He also apologized to the families of his victims, as if that were the one thing they needed. When the trial came to an end, the families of the victims felt some sense of closure. However, the pain of losing loved ones will never go away. They must live with the awareness that their daughters, sisters, and friends fell victim to a monstrous man who used social media as a weapon to prey on the vulnerable. Twitter responded quickly to the event, promptly updating its rules. Company CEO Jack Dorsey acknowledged the seriousness of the situation and stated that more needed to be done to ensure safer use of the platform. The Japanese government acted similarly, expanding online psychiatric help and support, as well as improving education in digital safety and interpersonal relationships. Ultimately, the case of Takahiro Shiraishi serves as a tragic reminder of how fragile the line between the virtual and the real world can be. Social media, with its enormous potential for connecting people, can also become a place where evil finds access to the most vulnerable. It is important to recognize that each of us is responsible for our behavior online. We must remain vigilant, attentive to ourselves and others, especially when it comes to mental health. Help can come in the most unexpected forms. But it's important not to shut down, not to stay alone, and not to trust those who promise easy solutions to life's deepest struggles. Thank you for watching.